Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into our daily quiz. Since it's a Sunday, we would have the static part of our discussion. Let's get started and look into the first question. Which of the following statements is the best description of the doctrine of immunity of instrumentalities? It provides for the validation of pre-constitution laws that violate fundamental rights upon the premise that such laws are not null and void ab initio but become unenforceable only to the extent of such inconsistency with the fundamental rights. Second option, it signifies a limitation of the lawmaking power of the legislature. Whatever the government is unable to do directly, it cannot do indirectly. Third option, it holds that a larger and greater body should not exercise functions which can be carried out efficiently by a smaller and a lesser body. Fourth option, it seeks to ensure that the government at one level operates without unduly restricting operations of the governments at the other level. Which of the statements describe the best about doctrine of immunity of instrumentalities? The answer to this is D. Let's try and understand what is this doctrine all about. When you look into the first statement speaks about what is called as the doctrine of eclipse. What is this doctrine of eclipse? Let's say for example, before the passing of the constitution, there were certain laws which are already present. They have been continued even after the passing of the constitution. Such laws will not be declared unconstitutional initially, but it has to be proved that it is in contravention with the fundamental rights. That means it is violating some of the provisions of the fundamental rights. Only when it is proved it is violating the fundamental rights, that is when such a law will become unconstitutional. If it is not proved, it continues to exist even after the constitution. Is what is this doctrine of eclipse? The second option here is speaking about the doctrine of colorable legislation. We have discussed about this in the past as well. The third is speaking about the principle of subsidiarity. What is this principle of subsidiarity? Let's say for example, we have what is called as the Panchayati Raj. We also have what is called as the municipality bodies. Let's say we have the central government at the central level. We also have the local bodies like the Panchayat, and we also have the municipal bodies. So all those functions which can be performed by the Panchayati Raj or by the municipal bodies, such functions not necessarily has to be performed by the central government. Is what is this principle of subsidiarity? Why? That is because when you look into the Panchayati Raj institutions, they interact with the people. It is these institutions which directly interact with the people and understand what are their problems. Since they are working at the grassroots level, they would be in a much better position to understand the problems of the people, provide solutions to the people as they interact with them directly. So the principle of subsidiarity, which is given in the third option, basically speaks about that the central government should not look at all those work or should not perform those functions which can be performed by the panchayati or the municipality bodies. It means to say that when a lesser body or a smaller body is able to perform such a task, the central body or a higher body should not take up such a responsibility. This is what is called as principle of subsidiarity. Now comes the fourth option. This fourth option is the right answer, which speaks about doctrine of immunity of instrumentalities. Let me explain this concept for you. Let's say for example, we have the central government. Let's say for example, we also have the state governments. The properties of the central government might be present in the state, or there are other functions that can be taken by the state government. But what would happen? Let's say for example, there is one political party at the central government with a different ideology. Or let's say for example, there is another political party which is a different political party than that is existing at the state level. So both these political parties might not have good relationship. So what do? They constantly interfere with the working of these governments. So ideally, when it comes to the federal system, when it comes to the federal establishment, they have independence, they have autonomy, there is distribution of powers, so they should be able to work independently. But there are certain examples where the taxation power of the central government will interfere with the state government. The taxation power of the state government will interfere for the central government, which means to say they will not let each other work efficiently. In order to overcome such a scenario with respect to the taxation, what we have is the doctrine of immunity of instrumentalities. This is one of the concept that was imported from the United States of America, and such a doctrine was released by the judiciary of United States of America. So basically, according to this particular doctrine, both the governments will have immunity such that in case there is the property of the central government in a particular state, let's say state of Maharashtra, or let's say state of Gujarat, or let's say state of Madhya Pradesh, such properties will not be taxed by the state government, and similar provisions are also present when it comes to the central government as well. When it comes to the Indian Constitution, what we have is the Article 285 of the Indian Constitution, Article 289 of the Indian Constitution, which speaks about exemption of the property of the union from state taxation. So the property of the union shall, save in so far as Parliament may by law otherwise provide, be exempt from all taxes imposed by a state or by any authority within a state. Article 289 speaks about exemption of property and income of a state from the union taxation. So this is what we call as the doctrine of immunity of instrumentalities. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to absolute veto, which of the following statements is or correct? The president can use his absolute veto with respect to private members' bills but not government bills. In India, the president has never exercised his absolute veto before. Which of the statements are correct in reference to the absolute veto? The answer to this is none. Why? That is because the president can use the absolute veto, yes, 100% with respect to the private members' bill. What is a private members' bill? Let's say, for example, we have the government. The government also has what is called as the ministers. The ones which are introduced by the ministers are what is called as government bills, and the ones which is not introduced by the government but a member of the parliament is what is called as the private member bill. So this person who is a member of parliament is not part of the government. So such a bill introduced by any other member of the parliament, not of the government, that is what is called as private member bill. So the president can use his absolute veto if it is a bill of the parliament which is passed by the private member. Apart from that, whenever there is a cabinet which resigns before the president could give his assent to the bill, and when the new cabinet comes up, advises the president not to give such an assent to the bill of the old cabinet, that is when it can also be imposed by the president of India. So it is not only the private members bill, but it also includes when a old cabinet wanted to pass a particular bill, but that cabinet is not present, but the new cabinet comes up, they ask the president not to give assent to that particular bill. Such provision is also present. And now when we turn back to the history books, in India, the president has exercised his absolute veto. In 1954, it was exercised by Dr. Rajendra Prasad as a president, and later in 1991, it was used by then president R. Venkatramana. So it has been used in the past when it comes to the absolute veto. Now let's look into the next practice question. An open competition system of selection and recruitment of civil servants was introduced in the which act? Charter Act of 1833, Charter Act of 1853, Government of India Act of 1858, Indian Councils Act of 1861. The answer to this is Charter Act of 1853. So it was through this particular act that we have the introduction of what is called as the birth to the Indian civil service, which was open to all the Indians. This system ended the appointments by recommendation and started a system of open and fair competition. So this whole process was introduced in Charter Act of 1853. So kindly remember, the first time it was planned to introduce was in 1833, but it was not successful. So the successful implementation happened in 1853. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following statements is or incorrect? It is asking for the incorrect statement. Article 323A contemplates establishment of tribunals for public service matters only. Article 323b contemplates establishment of tribunals for certain other matters. Tribunals under Article 323a can be established only by the Parliament. Tribunals under Article 323b can be established both by the Parliament and state legislatures with respect to matters falling within their legislative competence. Under Article 323a, only one tribunal for the centre, one for each state or two or more states may be established. There is no question of hierarchy of tribunals, whereas under Article 323b, a hierarchy of tribunals may be created. Which of the statements are incorrect? Since it is asking for the incorrect statement, the answer to this is none. Why? Because all the three statements that are given in this particular question with respect to establishment of the tribunals under Article 323a and Article 323b is absolutely right. Since all the three statements given here in this practice question is right, the answer would be none. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following statements with respect to the language to be used in Parliament. The business of the House can be transacted in any of the languages mentioned in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. A member can address the House in his mother tongue. Which of the above statements is or correct? The answer to this is 2 only. Why? That is because when it comes to the transaction of the Parliament, it is not all the languages that are mentioned in the 8th schedule, but instead it is Hindi and English. So when it comes to the transaction, it can be English or Hindi when it comes to business of the House. But let's say there is a member of the Parliament, he wants to address the Parliament with his own language, that is his mother tongue, or any of the languages which are present in the 8th schedule. He can seek the permission of the presiding officer and address the Parliament in the mother tongue or in the 8th schedule languages. Since the second option is right and the first option is wrong, the answer to this is 2 only. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following motions is moved when the undiscussed clauses of a bill or a resolution are also put to vote along with the discussed ones due to want of time? Is it substitute motion? Is it superseding motion? Is it guillotine closure or statutory motion? The answer to this is guillotine closure. What exactly happens? Let's say there is a particular scenario where there is paucity of time, there is not enough time, they have to close the proceedings with respect to a particular bill. So in that particular period of time, because they do not have time to discuss every single section or a particular piece or a clause, that is when they bring in a particular closure motions called as the guillotine closure. So the answer to this is guillotine closure. Now when it comes to closure motion, there are 4 in number. One is the simple closure, next is the closure by compartments, the third is the kangaroo closure, and the fourth is what is called as the guillotine closure. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following are the compensatory or regulatory taxes? Traffic regulations, toll for the use of a road or bridge, price control. Which of them are compensatory or regulatory taxes? The answer to this is 1, 2 and 3. What is this compensatory or regulatory taxes? Let me explain this for you. We have one of the important articles in the Constitution, that is Article 301 of the Indian Constitution. What does it speak about? It speaks about freedom of trade and commerce throughout the territory of India, and such a transaction, such a trade will be free, says this particular article. But now let's say for example there is a particular product, or let's say for example goods which have to be sent from the state of Maharashtra to, let's say, the state of West Bengal. So what will the state of West Bengal do? It does not want this particular product from the state of Maharashtra. Let's say hypothetically it imposes certain taxes such that all these goods will not be able to reach West Bengal. Such a law, if it is passed by the West Bengal government or any of the governments in India, it means it is violating Article 301 of the Indian Constitution, which is why we have what is called as 301, which means to say there will be freedom of trade and commerce throughout the territory of India, and in case state governments are imposing any taxes which is violating of this, it is unconstitutional. When it comes to this particular provision, there are two different compartments. One is what is called as the compensatory or regulatory taxes. The other is what is called as direct and discrepancy taxes. What do we mean by compensatory or regulatory taxes? Let's say, for example, the state of West Bengal has made sure that the roads in West Bengal are very good. So what does it do? It enters into a public private partnership. So as it enters into a public private partnership, this public private partnership will also have to extract money because they have invested a lot of money into the infrastructure. So what do? They have what is called as the toll plaza, which will collect some amount of money because they are passing through this particular road, because they are using that particular infrastructure. Such is what is called as the compensatory or regulatory taxes. These are not penalty as a whole, but the ones who are using that particular road, they're using that particular infrastructure, will have to pay certain money. That is what is called as the compensatory or regulatory taxes. These are not unconstitutional. These are not barred by Article 301, but these are ones which are supported. That is because there is a specific government which has advanced the infrastructure, which has enhanced the infrastructure. In such a scenario, what the state government can do is impose a particular fine or what is called as a fee or a penalty. That is what is called as compensatory or regulatory taxes. Or let's say, for example, there is a particular place where there is violation of the traffic. In order to control the traffic regulations, compensatory or regulatory mechanism can be introduced. And at the same time, let's say, for example, there is a particular product which is already present in a particular state. If this particular product enters that particular state, what it can result is price drop. Let's say, for example, agricultural productivity or an agricultural product. In such a case, in order to control the price, the state governments can once again ensure what is called as the compensatory or regulatory taxes. The other compartment speaks about direct or what is called as discrepancy taxes. Let me explain this concept with the help of an example. That example is one of the landmark judgments given by the Supreme Court of India. What is it? We have one of the judgments called as Athiya Tea Company versus the state of Assam. What was this judgment all about? Let's say we have the state of Assam. There is a particular company which was transmitting or selling its goods from one state to another. So what was it doing? It was using the roads in the state of Assam, and it was also using the inland waterways. So what did the Assam government do? They come up with a legislation. This particular legislation said, in case there is a particular company which is not of the origin of Assam, and if it is of an origin of a different state, and if it is using the roads or the inland waterways, they will be taxed, said the state of Assam. So they passed a legislation. So this goes to the Supreme Court of India. So the Supreme Court of India says that this is unconstitutional. Why? Because Article 301 of the Indian Constitution speaks about trade and commerce, and that has to be free. Since it is a discrepancy tax which prevents that, that is what is said by Supreme Court, that this is unconstitutional, and as a result, anything which is barring the free trade and commerce in a particular state with the passing of a legislation, that will be called as unconstitutional. But if it is compensatory or in a regulatory mechanism, that will be held as constitutional. Now let's look into the next practice question. Under Article 35 of the Indian Constitution, Parliament shall have and the legislature of a state shall not have power to make laws with respect to which of the following articles? Article 16, Article 23, Article 29, Article 33 and Article 34. The answer to this is 1, 4 and 5 only. When it comes to Article 35 of the Indian Constitution, it is only the Parliament which would be able to make laws, and this power is not given to the state legislature. So the state legislature would not be able to make any types of laws when it comes to these articles. Which are those articles? Prescribing residence as a condition for certain employments or appointments in a state or union territory or local authority. Such a power is given to Parliament under Article 30. If a state government wants to do something about it, it cannot pass a law when it comes to this particular provision. Empowering courts other than Supreme Court and the High Courts to issue directions, orders and writs of all kinds for enforcement of fundamental rights. Again, this can be done by the Parliament. Restricting or abrogating the application of fundamental rights to members of armed forces, police force. This again can be imposed by the Parliament. Indemnifying any government servant or any other person for any act done during the operation of martial law in an area under Article 34. Again, this can be imposed or a law can be drafted by the Parliament. Apart from this, there are some offenses which are committed by individuals. Let's say, for example, untouchability, or let's say, for example, traffic in human beings and forced labor under Article 23. If a law has to be drafted, it is the parliament which has to do it, and it is not the state legislature. Now, let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following committees of the Constituent Assembly were headed by Jawaharlal Nehru? Union Powers Committee, Provincial Constitution Committee, Rules of the Procedure Committee. The answer to this is one only. Why? When it comes to the Constituent Assembly and who was heading it, Jawaharlal Nehru was heading only the Union Powers Committee. The other, that is the Provincial Constitution Committee, was headed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and when it comes to the Rules of the Procedure Committee, it was headed by Rajendra Prasad. So kindly remember who heads a particular committee, because this can be a very important question when it comes to your preliminary examination. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to national emergency, which of the following statements is or correct? The president can proclaim a national emergency only after receiving a written recommendation from the prime minister, when one-fourth of total number of members of Lok Sabha give a written notice to the speaker or to the president if the house is not in session. A special sitting of the house should be held within 14 days for the purpose of considering a resolution disapproving the continuation of such a proclamation. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is none. That is because when you look into the first option, it is not the written recommendation from the Prime Minister, but instead it is the Cabinet. So this was changed in the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, and we also have the second option which is wrong. That is because it is not 1/4, but instead it is 1/10. Since both the options are wrong, the answer to this is none. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.